everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my partner in everything Packers, Wes Hodkiewicz. Wes, we have a ton of ground to cover on this show, and we're just going to start with the 53-man roster. There's still been some changes and adjustments continue to go on with it, but I know we've talked about this in the past, but I need to start here because I think the story of training camp in 2025 for the Green Bay Packers was Bo Melton, making a position switch and making the team. I mean, this is my 20th training camp with Packers.com. You can add a few more from my newspaper days back when I was even younger. I have never seen a player who was asked to make a position switch and then make the team. That guy has always ended up getting cut. There isn't room for him. It doesn't work out. Bo Melton switches from receiver to cornerback. He's obviously still a big part of things on special teams, but he makes the squad, and I can do nothing but tip my cap to him.
It's all you can do. I mean, when you make a switch like that, historically, that's usually a death knell, right? When you're trying to make, at 26 years old, he's been a receiver all his life, and we get to mini camp in the middle of June. It wasn't even at the beginning of the offseason program. It was in the final stretch, and he starts lining up with the cornerbacks, and everybody's kind of like, oh, well, this is interesting.
Yeah.
And then he comes back at the start of training camp, and I think it was right from the first presser that Brian Gutekunst said, hey, he's going to be out there with the defensive backs today. And as Gutekunst also talked about after he was reviewing the 53-man roster with the media on Wednesday morning, this wasn't a situation where it was like, okay, well, they gave him a spot. Like, they were honestly surprised how comfortable he looked there. He did not look like a fish out of water in the cornerback position, which is remarkable when you think about the fact that he's been playing football his entire life. He's been mostly concentrated on receiver in his college and professional career, and here he is flipping sides. And I'm between you, me, and our viewers, I messaged him yesterday. I was texting him a little bit and said, the fact that he did that in 8 weeks is legendary.
Yeah, it is.
Like, that is wild that he was able to pull that off.
Yeah, it's not just the story of this training camp in 2025. It's one of the best training camp stories that either one of us has ever come across. And kudos to Melton. I'm really excited to see exactly what happens and what his role becomes on this team, as far as the depth at cornerback, and then what he perhaps brings on special teams. Another guy to mention at cornerback before we move on to some other spots. We knew going in there was going to be a lot of competition for the depth and how that was going to shake out at that position. And Kamal Hadden ends up making the 53. And I point this out, and I don't know how big of a role Kamal Hadden is going to play. If you are on this 53 and you're at a position like that where there can be as many as 4 guys on the field at one time, there's a good chance you're going to be playing at some point. You're not just going to be riding the bench or be a game day inactive for 17 weeks. But Kamal Hadden, he dealt with an injury in training camp. I believe it was a hip injury. He came back. He was trying to get back into the flow of things. Didn't have the greatest game in Indianapolis. And you know me during those games, Wes. I'm on the live chat, the live blog with the fans and everything. And all the fans are saying, oh, Kamal Hadden, nice knowing you. It looks like, he's going to get cut, et cetera. And you just have to let the entire preseason play out, right? Mm-hmm. Because Hadden came back. He kind of got his legs under him again in the Indy game. He came back in the joint practice against the Seahawks and in the preseason finale against Seattle, and he had a fire about him. Like, he was talking and chirping and trash talking and all that kind of stuff, but he was also backing it up with what he was doing out there on the field, and just that fiery all-or-nothing approach that he took in the final week, it got him on this roster.
Yeah, you love to see it, and I always think it's funny. Two things of this. One, that's why the actual decision makers within the Packers are not running a live blog during the game. They're not listening to what the fans are saying in the direct regard, obviously, in the overall macro level they are. But the fact of the matter is you have to look at the totality of everything. It was a question that you had even said to Brian Gutekunst that sort of elicited his response on Kamal Hadden, and that it's not just about one specific instance. It's about the whole camp, but also how you make progress throughout that camp.
Yep.
And if you draw up a defensive back, if you draw up a cornerback specifically, you're going to come up with somebody, prototypical-wise, blueprint-wise, it's going to look an awful like Kamal Hadden. I mean, he is a lengthy corner, and the Packers pursued this guy, man. I mean, you go back to last year. Yes, he got drafted by Kansas City, but it's not like he was on the tryout circuit and just randomly ended up in Green Bay. It was after final cuts last year. The Packers quickly brought him in. And he had an opportunity to get elevated for 2 games, and certainly as they're looking for options on the perimeter, he gives them some depth there. What was the number one thing you and I were talking about throughout the offseason program and throughout training camp is the fact that the Green Bay has a lot of guys who can play the slot, including Nate Hobbs and Keyshawn Nixon. They're 2 number 1, number 2 cornerbacks on the perimeter.
Yep.
But what they were sort of lacking behind Carrington Valentine was perimeter options. Now you have that with Hadden, and what it looks like you have it with Bo Melton too. I mean, that has predominantly been where Bo worked as well. So a lot of versatility in that secondary, but to be able to have a couple developmental guys, in Bo's case, learning the position, in Hadden's case, a guy that had chops as a 6th-round pick. Those are the guys now that you want to see grow behind that top 3, so to speak, at the corner position.
Yeah, it's always a special moment for those guys who make a 53 coming out of training camp for the first time when it didn't happen for them as a rookie, didn't happen as a draft pick, biding their time on the practice squad, putting in the work, taking another shot in whether it's year 2 or year 3, whatever it might be, and Hadden comes through there and gets on the 53. Another topic to hit on, the undrafted rookie streak appears like it will stay alive here because Nazir Stackhouse, the undrafted rookie defensive tackle, nose tackle, whatever you want to call him, from Georgia, he makes the 53 along with one of his teammates and defensive line mates at Georgia, Warren Brinson, who was a 6th-round draft pick and part of the Packers draft class. But I think neither you nor I is surprised that Nazir Stackhouse made this team, and it's not just because of the streak or anything that anybody wants to keep going. You look at that young man, and he screams nose tackle. He screams run stuffer, and he did a lot of things in this preseason, in this training camp and in this preseason to show that he can be, as a young player, can be a guy that you can stick in there in the middle of the defensive line, tell him to go stop the run.
Yeah, Mike, and this is going to go down as probably one of the more confusing undrafted stories for Green Bay. I am not as much surprised that he made the 53-man roster as I am the fact that he wasn't drafted to begin with.
I would agree.
This is a guy that was pretty well credentialed to be at Georgia, did start a lot of games for Georgia. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, he might have even had more starts than Warren Brinson did during the course of his career. And not that that's the whole litmus test. There's a lot that goes into development, who ultimately ends up being really good pros. But this is not some guy from Nobody U. This is a guy that came from one of the most distinguished programs in the country and won some national championships and, came to Green Bay, I wouldn't say with a chip on his shoulder because he's a really gregarious, pleasant guy, but the way he played on the practice field, it looked like he really wanted this thing. And if you look at it from the standpoint of what the Packers put into it, I mean, he is one of the biggest investments the Packers have ever made, at least during my time on the beat, into an undrafted rookie. There was guaranteed money, a good signing bonus. I mean, I just felt like he lived up to everything, and he earned that spot. And to be 21 consecutive years now, and when you look at the lineage, specifically on the defensive line, the Packers have had some really good pros come out of that system. And now with TJ Slayton being gone and some room there with the run defense, it's going to take time. It's not going to be overnight. There is no express route, especially when you're playing against some of the biggest, baddest guys on the planet in the trenches. But there is a platform there and a foundation for Stackhouse to make a contribution very quickly for this defense.
Yeah, I think so too. I think he might be thrown into the mix there. A couple of newcomers brought in who are part of the Packers 53-man roster that we should talk about. The Packers, just before all the roster decisions were made on Tuesday, traded a 6th-round draft pick in 2027 to the Philadelphia Eagles for a backup offensive lineman. His name is Darian Kennard, and he was drafted in the 4th round. Fifth round. Yes, because he happened to be drafted just 5 selections after Zach Tom was taken at the end of the 4th round in 2022. He was taken at near the top of the 5th round, just 5 selections after Tom. The Packers making a move here to shore up some of the depth on the offensive line with Kennard, partly as a result of Travis Glover going on injured reserve with the shoulder issue, and he is out for the season. And then Jacob Monk is beginning the season on injured reserve with the designation to return from his injury in training camp. So some questions about the depth there because of injuries and guys that went down, and Brian Gutekunst makes a trade.
He does, and as he mentioned, I mean, when they felt really good about how they were sitting with all their various options on the offensive line, but ultimately at the end of the day, they just kind of ran out of bodies. I mean, when you look at John Williams, I think they had high aspirations for him. He has the back injury. They have the surgery in the offseason. He's still on physically unable to perform. Travis Glover had put together some good things. I mean, when you look at this structurally from an offensive lineman perspective, I mean, the guy has everything you could ever want.
And they felt good about the way he had come back from a subpar performance when he got thrown in there in the playoff game in Philadelphia last year. They really liked where Glover was headed, but then unfortunately his season ends with a serious injury.
Yeah, so I mean, just remarkable the fact that it just seemed like Green Bay was offensive line was a weird one for Green Bay this camp, because it wasn't like they were ever really in trouble, but like they just were always kind of teetering on who that next guy up is going to be. And then once Jacob Monk injured the hamstring and had to go on, as we found out, injured reserve, designated to return, eliminating him for the first 4 games, that's where Gutekunst felt like, okay, we got to go use our pro personnel folks and find somebody. Kennard is a fascinating situation in that, yes, he's won 3 Super Bowls. He's played in 2 NFL games. And he was drafted, and then he ends up on a practice squad, ends up signing eventually with Philadelphia. Doesn't play much last year, but Green Bay talked about it, and Gutekunst talked about it. The way that Philadelphia develops offensive linemen, there's a lot of respect there. You think back to even Andre Dillard last year. They brought him in after his time with the Eagles. So the Packers feel like this is a guy that can add some depth there, both at guard, at tackle, and ultimately, for as much versatility as they have amongst those front 6, there's a lot of question marks after that, a lot of youth after that, and he's somebody that kind of helps absolve that. Yeah,
really interesting that he's just the second player in the Super Bowl era to earn a Super Bowl ring 3 consecutive years. He had 2 with Kansas City before he went to the Eagles, and then the Eagles end up winning it, of course. So the other new addition, linebacker Nick, is it Niemann or Nyman?
Oh. Put me on the spot.
Yeah, I know. I
forgot to. I did plenty of research on him. And
I forgot to look up the pronunciation. I'm going to say Nyman and hope that it's right, but maybe it's Niemann. Maybe you can find it while I'm talking about him. Anyway, he becomes a signing to the 53. He was released by the Houston Texans, who had signed him as a free agent.
Yeah.
After 4 years with the Los Angeles Chargers. He was originally a draft pick of the Chargers back in 2021. He was actually taken in the same round, in the 6th round in 2021, which is the same round the Packers took Isaiah McDuffie, also a linebacker, that year. He hasn't played a whole lot on defense over his 4 years with the Chargers. A little over 300 snaps on defense, but almost 1,300 special teams snaps in his career to this point. So this is a move not just for the linebacker depth, but to boost the special teams and bring another veteran into that bunch there. And I guess for whatever reason, he signed a multi-year contract with Houston with some salary guarantees as a free agent. It doesn't work out. They end up cutting him, kind of a surprise cut on Tuesday earlier this week, and the Packers swoop in and pick him up, and he's on Green Bay's 53.
First off, Nick Niemann.
Niemann.
Thank you to Hall of Fame tight end Antonio Gates for that pronunciation, because I went back and watched him getting drafted in 2021.
Nicely done.
Yeah, thanks.
Nothing like a truly unscripted show.
Nothing like a truly unscripted show. So I'm banking on Antonio Gates actually getting that pronunciation right. That being said, hey, listen, this guy, when you go back and look at it, his RAS score was nuts. I mean, I think it was 9.51?
Yeah.
Ran a really good 40 at his pro day coming out of COVID. And has been a really productive player for a number of years. The part that I laughed at, it's not so much about him signing with Houston and not working out, them giving him guaranteed money, and that it's how many guys in the Rich Bisaccia area that Green Bay has built their special teams around that got here late. Zane Anderson was claimed 2 years ago.
That's right.
He's a core guy for them. Eric Wilson signed in the middle. He actually signed the week before he went to London
in 2022.
Yeah, went back, played in London back-to-back weeks because of him previously being with the New Orleans Saints. There's been a number of these guys that have. Christian Welch is one of them too, who also returned back on the practice squad after he didn't make the 53. So these are the type of guys you look for. And honestly, Mike, I think you and I, when we looked at it and we saw that the Packers cut down to 53, the roster of 53, but only included 4 inside linebackers, it was only a matter of time before either somebody was back or elevated. You're not going to go into a season with just 4, not how important they are to special teams.
Yeah, you figured something was in the works there, and this was the direction the Packers went. So I want to shift gears to the Packers starting their preparation now for Week 1 against Detroit, but we do have to pay some bills while we're here. So for right now, we need to have a word from our sponsors. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. At Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50-plus years of better. Pit Boss Grills, the official grill of Packers tailgating at Lambeau or at your house. Take your game day to the next level with a Pit Boss wood pellet grill. Pit Boss Grills available at Menards. Welcome back to Packers Unscripted. Wes, we got a glimpse at Wednesday's practice for Green Bay. A couple of practices this week, and then the players will get a little bit of a break. Then they'll be back on Labor Day on Monday to get things rolling again. Some good news on the health front for Green Bay here, because we saw Xavier McKinney, Aaron Banks, Elton Jenkins, Jaden Reed, and Dontavian Wicks, all of whom missed time, some more than others, but all of whom missed time during training camp with various injuries. They were all back on the practice field on Wednesday. Now, there are some guys we did not see. Nate Hobbs, Savion Williams, Barron Sorrell, Zane Anderson. They were not back just yet, so we'll see what happens perhaps next week. Maybe somebody from that group will be back. But I think it's pretty clear, based on what we've seen, that the Packers were being extremely cautious with players who were injured during training camp, the guys that they know that they were going to need to count on when the regular season got here. If somebody got hurt, whether it was Xavier McKinney, whether it was a flared-up back with Elton Jenkins, whether it was Jaden Reed's foot, they weren't going to push anybody in training camp and take any chances with anything getting worse. And hopefully that strategy pays off here with the Packers getting back a little closer to full health for Week 1.
Hannah up in the control room, if she wants to. She probably doesn't have the graphic available, but she can roll the graphic. It can come down on the screen. The Mike Spofford Let's Be Real moment of the week begins with the fact that Green Bay could have made some moves on Wednesday. Nick Neiman comes in. They could have pushed any of these guys that were injured onto injured reserve now and had the option to bring them back at some point. You have the 2 that you can automatically put on, which they used on Marshawn Lloyd and Jacob Monk.
Right.
But then the day after, you can carry them through the 53, put them on IR. You have up to those 8 designations for the season. Green Bay did not do any of that. Unfortunately, Micah Robinson was released, the rookie 7th-round pick. Wishing Micah well. Awesome dude. Hopefully, I'd love to see him back in Green Bay here. All that being said, if there was any question long-term about any of these injuries for Green Bay, whether the guys practiced today or they did not, those guys would be moving over to IR and Micah would still be on the 53. So I think that's really bodes well. The other thing I want to mention with that, it's great to see Jaden Reed out there. Awesome to see Dontavian Wicks, all the guys that you mentioned, certainly Banks and Jenkins, back stuff, trying to work through all that. But the fact that Xavier McKinney practiced, individuals limited in that joint session with the Seahawks,
right,
and was able to be back out there today, I think that's a really positive sign. For his calf, those soft tissue injuries, you never can be too sure, but obviously you wouldn't be out there if the body's not responding to that. Brian Gutekunst was asked about Reed, Wicks, feeling good, hopeful for them and their availability against the Lions, because here's the thing, Mike. This is the reality of it. You don't look past any opponent, but the Packers need these veterans, need their players to play 2 games in 4 days. against the Detroit Lions and then the Washington Commanders. You got to give them a puncher's chance at being as healthy as possible going into the season. And I would wager, with how they handled all these guys, Jordan Love among them, that erring on the high side of caution during an otherwise, I don't want to say meaningless, but you've already put your installs in. It's not life or death with these practices. Take your time, regather yourself, be ready for week one.
Yeah, I think a couple of things that they were looking at there with regard to some of these, the decisions and really playing the high side of caution with these guys. One is what you said, that when the regular season starts, you have a late Sunday afternoon and then a Thursday night game right out of the gate. So health is going to be paramount, and obviously those games are against two NFC contenders, just like the Packers are. But the other part too is because, unlike last year, the Packers don't have like this Friday game to start the season where the calendar gets all shifted around. The Packers headed into this week. You make the roster decisions on Tuesday. It sounds like, from what Matt LaFleur said, they conducted a closed practice late in the day on Tuesday, then practices Wednesday and Thursday. Next week, a practice on Monday, and then the usual Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. So just over the 2 weeks, essentially, between roster decisions and week one, that's 7 practices. So resting up these guys and getting them back, I mean, yeah, you don't want anybody to miss time. But when you're looking at the calendar and saying, hey, if we can get them back at roster decision time, there are still 7 practices for them to get out there, to get the reps that they need, et cetera, et cetera. And the focus has also been obviously on quarterback Jordan Love and working him back from the surgery on his left thumb. From what we saw in the brief portion of practice we were able to watch, it looks like he is using that left hand certainly more than he was. He's no longer taking the snap off of the stool in front of him. He's actually catching shotgun snaps, taking snaps from under center. So that's another step forward for Jordan Love, and we'll see where this goes. But for all of the angst and consternation and whatnot with regard to the team's health, and I'm not trying to downplay it any, because nobody wants to have that many frontline players missing that much time in training camp, but hopefully some signs are pointing in the right direction here for Green Bay.
In as much as you don't want to have guys not on the practice field in training camp, you also don't want guys not on the practice field in the lead up to your first game of the season.
Yeah.
And I think Green Bay was finding a way to do that. I love what you mentioned there, and it's a really good point by counting up how many of these practices are available to them, both next week and also during this interim period, this mini bye period, with what would have historically been like the last preseason game week, right? So being able to have a little bit more of a buffer there, I think, is really important for this football team. And again, just take it all in and look at what it is. I mean, Jordan Love has a rapport with these guys. We saw one thing out. It's not the official NFL tabulation for roster age, but there's been a couple reports out signifying that Green Bay will be the youngest team in the NFL for the 3rd consecutive season. Well, they didn't get to be the youngest team in the NFL by suddenly bringing in a bunch of new bodies. There's a few, but offensively, it's a lot of those same guys that Love has been working with. Yes, you have to get the chemistry down. You got to get your timing down, but it's not like these are new faces to him. And then the one that is potentially going to be a new weapon in this offense, the biggest piece, well, that's the one that fortunately was healthy throughout training camp, and Matthew Golden got work with both Love and then also Malik Willis down the stretch.
Absolutely. Well, one last thing before we go and before we officially turn the page forward to week one for our shows next week coming up and previewing the Lions game and all of that, is Thursday night inside the Lambeau Field atrium. The longtime and now retired president and CEO of the Green Bay Packers, Mark Murphy, will be inducted by his lonesome, which is an honor in and of itself, into the Packers Hall of Fame. And I know there are so many things that we could talk about with regard to his legacy, but if in terms of listing all of the accomplishments, and there are many of them when it comes to this football team and everything about this organization. To me, personally, the one that is at the top of the list was that 2025 NFL draft being in Green Bay. That was Mark Murphy's doing. He's the one who sold Roger Goodell essentially on the idea that Green Bay can make this special and make it work. And it wasn't just special, it was spectacular.
Yeah.
And I give Mark Murphy all the credit in the world for that.
Yeah, it was. And as you and I have talked ad nauseum at this point, it was the perfect capstone to his run here in Green Bay. And when you think about just those 17 plus years of him at the helm, obviously we've talked about as a person, and I've done that myself, given my own, kind of anecdotes of working with Mark. But the one thing I will add on to this is the Packers were pretty darn successful during his stewardship of this organization as well. Yeah, I know everybody wants to win as many Super Bowls as possible, but they got one. He leaves here with a Super Bowl ring. He had to make a really pivotal decision in 2017 and 2018, a difficult decision, moving on from Ted Thompson, hiring Brian Gutekunst, and then obviously a year later, within 12 months of that, letting Mike McCarthy go. And 3 weeks after that, hiring Matt LaFleur as his new head coach, the Packers' new head coach. I've always talked about this, and I think I've said it on some of our shows, but I'll say it once more. When you can have that type of run and you hire one GM and one head coach, that says something about your leadership. It said something about the direction the franchise is going, because what made the Packers successful when he started, when he inherited that job from Bob Harlan, that whole script is flipped by the end of it.
Yeah.
And you have to create your own way. And I felt like Mark, he followed the footsteps for a couple years there, but by the end of it, I mean, he was walking in unfamiliar sand and still led this place with vision, character, and never told anybody so. I never was sitting there saying, hey, I like Matt LaFleur. You guys gave me a little bit of flack about hiring him or being involved in the process. No, he never did any of that. He kept it real. And in addition to the draft, everything else he did, the Super Bowl, the monumental growth of this organization, myself representing some of that. I just it is fitting that he is a lone inductee this year. That's honor reserved for few. And certainly Mark Murphy has earned that.
Yeah, and I'm going to miss things had changed over the last few years, but I got to spend a lot of years at the road games sitting next to him in the press box. I was sort of like at the end of our website and communications row, and then Mark was at the other end of kind of the executive and personnel executives and whatnot that were also sitting in the press box, and I sat next to him at a number of games, and too many little stories to tell, I guess, but I'll always remember that because as much as he's the boss and he's the president and the CEO, sitting next to him in the press box watching a football game, you're reminded the guy was a player. Yeah. And that never necessarily left him either, the way he watched the game, the way he understood the game. And that's easy to forget, because even if you took out his NFL playing career, he's had an absolutely incredible professional
it's insane.
List of achievements and accomplishments and everything he did even before he got to the Packers. So but anyway, hats off to Mark Murphy, a tremendous honor, and I hope he's not a stranger around here.
No, I doubt he will be. I mean, he's going to obviously let Ed be the chairman now and lead the Packers into the next era, but certainly I would expect him to still be around here. I know obviously he's going to be involved, I believe, with UWGB here in town as well. The last thing I'll close on with that, when you mentioned how Mark was sitting next to you in the press box, that ain't common practice. There aren't a lot of people in those positions that he's in, ownership or just in the CEO or presidential role, that's doing that type of thing. Mark did that because he wanted to be out there. He wanted to be by his personnel guys. He wanted to be a little bit amongst the people, and special, very special dude.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team, and we will be back next week, back on our regular schedule, hopefully with 2 shows per week, leading up to Week 1 and the season opener against the Detroit Lions. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.